Hey. Hey. You're not on your.
They're just not starting it out. They were delaying it to allow people who had gone to the greenhouse to get over to the auditorium.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, we got it then. Okay.
Here we are.
Joys of technology. And thank God we got Joey, because I'd be lost. But yeah, next week we've got Ann Spafford from NC State University. She's been in the Hort department back when I was in the Hort department. So she and Helen Krause put together this book, Rain Gardening in the South, because a lot of these different projects, when you think about like green roofs, all the research for those were done up north. Rain gardens, research wasn't necessarily done in our area. So when you get these books out, the plants might not be appropriate to our region. So I remember this research going on in the back of the Hort Field Lab, where they had different rain gardens testing different plants.
I just took her out, but
That isn't me.
how was she needed?
But she'll give a great talk about rain gardens, kind of appropriate plants, different techniques. I think it'll be a great opportunity. I think she'll have the books available. The week after that, I believe, let's see. Well, actually, not the weekend. I'm getting my dates. October 10th, I'll just go with that. We'll have Annabelle Renwick from Duke Gardens. I've had the opportunity to get to know her a little bit over the last couple of years. She's fantastic. She heads the Stephen Bloodworth Bloomquist native plant garden at Duke Gardens. And they've done a Carolina Prairie Meadow in that garden. They've done burns. It's a great opportunity, but they've been looking at doing these pollinator kind of pocket gardens in urban settings. It's the whole movement of trying to bring these pollinator way stations throughout our landscape. So really looking forward to having Annabelle's come speak. And we do have a workshop coming up October 3rd with Michelle Hawks, who she always does fantastic workshops. It's worth the price of admission just to spend some time with Michelle, but she'll do some great container classes. I think we're about half sold out on this workshop, but you bring the container, we'll have a whole mess of different plants available and soil. So you get to work, you get plants, you get soil, and you leave with a great container for the fall. So we're looking forward to getting those going. And you can find out more information about the Tuesday Gardening Series if you go to renolda.org and look on the calendar. So with that being said, we'll start diving into more things related to the plant sale. Obviously, a couple reminders that it's Friends of Renolda Gardens. So if you're, basically our membership, that gives you the opportunity to pre-order plants and reserve them before the general public gets access to them. because we do sell out of a number of plants before the actual plant sale. We do ask that you pay, we'll send a link so you can pay, so that it's seamless. It's just pick up the plants. We will be sending out the link to this pre-order form right after the talk at about 2 o'clock. When your order gets tallied, it comes in, we do a Google form, we process it, make sure we still have everything, checking inventories, and then we'll send you a confirmation of your order with the link. Go ahead and pay for it. That way you can just swoop in, either just pick it up, or if you want, you can continue to shop. And that'll happen on Friday, September 29th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. We're trying to avoid doing pickups the day of the sale, just because if you've been here, when you have the chaos of everyone shopping and then trying to find an order that's been pulled aside, so we're trying to limit that as much as possible this year. Again, you can pre-order, but then obviously wander and see what else strikes your fancy. Again, we realize that we've been doing things wrong and not adding taxes to the sales, so we have got to do that now. So, unfortunately, taxes hit us everywhere. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the plants. Again, reminder, if you're not a friend, you can sign up and become a friend, but the deadline to do that, it would be Sunday, September 24th. That just gives us enough time to get processed and to us so we can actually get the form out to you in time. Again, this plant sale will be out on the front lawn of Rinalda House. We've been there for a number of years, so that should be old hat by now. Couple reminders, just check your email box, check your spam after 2 o'clock if it still hasn't shown up. After checking your spam folder and everything, and you still don't see it, then email either myself or Sarah. We've done our due diligence to make sure the email list is up to date. Okay, now we'll get into plants. And this was the board. I had the opportunity to speak up in Asheville this past fall, and the hotel that the symposium was at, this was the billboard out on the highway. And it was kind of one of those things of pulling up and going, yep, I'm with my people. This is always our exciting time of being able to do this plant sale, to bring plants that we know about that you aren't necessarily going to be finding in local garden centers, definitely won't be finding in box stores, things that we've grown, things that we know about that just aren't easily available, but we want to make sure they are. So we'll kind of work our way down the food chain, first starting with some of the trees. For those of you who have grown red buckeye, which is one of our native plants, this is actually a hybrid between our red buckeye and actually a northern species, Aesculus hippocastanum, which gets to be really big. This one actually will get to, this says 30 to 40 feet, but that's really an old specimen. You're looking more about 20 feet, gets red flowers. The hummingbirds do love it, can get really nice fall color. The unfortunate thing with red buckeye is already people have asked about the ones out, that are planted in the meadow. Oh, are they dead? Because they do get kind of a leaf scorch that will make them drop their leaves early. They're fine, but it's a fantastic fall, spring flowering tree. I'm finally learning to touch the screen to get this. This is actually, we've got our native fringe tree, Chionanthus virginicus. This is the Asian equivalent. This is a tough as nails tree. This whole species, Dave Creech down at Stephen F. Austin planted these for a mile long down right around Nacogdoches, Texas, around Stephen F. Austin. It is a tough as nails tree. Looks good throughout the whole summer, but in spring it just gets loaded with these bright white flowers. And this form, Tokyo Tower, actually came in from Japan a number of years ago. It's got a strongly upright habit. You can see in those photos it goes very vertical. These are actually a grouping that's planted over in Kernersville at the Senior Botanical Garden. But it's a fantastic upright spring flowering tree. It does have really nice fragrance. These came to us actually from Hidden Hollow Nursery, which was the one that was responsible for bringing this plant into the country. It's Tokyo Tower. This is a plant that I don't, with the whole native plant movement, there's still so many native plants that I don't see offered that should be. And this is one of our native dogwoods. If you go up into on the Blue Ridge Parkway, if you know the area called Graveyard Fields, there's a whole bunch planted, or not planted, they're native right there. But this is a fantastic native dogwood. It doesn't get the big white bracts. So dogwoods are divided out into different groups. There's the ones like our traditional dogwood with the big white showy bracts. That's a whole section of dogwood. This is a different section of dogwood. And it's ironic because all dogwoods are opposite leaved except for two species. This one, Cornus alternifolia, which means alternate leaves, and then Cornus controversa. The common name for this one is Pagoda Dogwood, which you can see in this photo. The way that it grows, it kind of forms layers. I've also heard it referenced as birthday cake dogwood because it forms these tiers. It gets these beautiful cobalt blue berries that the birds and wildlife love, and they sit on these red stalks, so it's very striking in fruit. Gets really nice fall color, but it's a fantastic native that people just, it's a little gangly in a container when you first buy it. So, it's one of those things, if it doesn't fit the marketing mold of what should look pretty in the garden center, it's not going to be available. But this is one we got from Oregon. There's a grower out there that was growing these, and I got really excited to be able to offer this. So Pagoda Dogwood. Now here's another dogwood that a lot of people don't know about, and this actually comes from Winston-Salem because I think Nan Janeway might be on this on Zoom following the talk, but this actually is cuttings off of her specimen that she got from J.C. Ralston in the 90s. This is Cornicheelliptica. It started out years ago as Cornus Closa, variety Angustata. Name changes. I won't even go into what they're calling dogwoods now. It's a travesty. But this is actually, it's an evergreen dogwood. I will say that sometimes they sort out that, some seedlings are more hardy than others, but if we get a bad winter like this past one where we had 5 degrees, the worst that'll happen is it drops its leaves and then it just behaves like a normal dogwood. But typically these hold on to their leaves all throughout the winter. They sometimes get a nice purplish cast to the foliage through winter. So it's an evergreen dogwood. Has the typical blooms of, your Coosa dogwood, gets the red, ball-shaped fruit like a Coosa dogwood. But the funny thing is, I always tell people, if you want, to expand your flowering season of dogwoods, just plant different, our native dogwood is usually the first one that starts. Then there's the hybrid between our native dogwood and the Asian dogwood that flowers. Then the Asian dogwood. And then this one was the last one to flower. And this typically was flowering for us in June. So it's a way to have dogwoods flowering in your garden the whole season. But these, like I said, came from cuttings from Nan Janeway's garden, and they've grown off like gangbusters, and they look absolutely stunning in containers right now. So really excited to offer this, and it's definitely one of those things that we can say, it grows in Winston-Salem because her specimen is absolutely stunning. Another native tree that typically you don't see offered that much, this is yellowwood. It's closely related to Wisteria. It's in that same family, so the flowers look like white Wisteria blooms hanging down. It's absolutely a stunning tree. It gets its name yellowwood. Partially, gets really nice yellow fall color, but also if you were to damage the bark, right underneath the bark, it's bright yellow. It's a stunning tree, really nice, smooth gray bark. And the flowers, when you see mature specimens of this in flower, they're stunning. But again, it's just a fantastic native flowering tree, blooms in spring. There's a photo of what it looks like in fall color. There's some gorgeous old specimens at Swarthmore College up in Pennsylvania that are just, I've had the opportunity to see them in full flower and they just stop you in your tracks. Another small flowering tree, anything in the Styrax family, I'm a sucker for. I want it. We do have 2 native Styrax, but then there's other groups in that family, and Halleagia happens to be another one. These will typically grow kind of on stream banks, kind of moist soils, shaded locations. They're not necessarily the easiest thing to cultivate, but they're absolutely stunning when they come into flower. They get absolutely covered in these white flowers that hang down, almost bell-shaped, very reminiscent of styrax. They get, the bark almost can get, exfoliating bark and stripes. Good yellow fall color. This one is Halleagia Diptura, and if you took my plant names talk, I think last year, the name Magniflora should tell you it's got bigger flowers than the typical species. So this is it's a fantastic little understory tree for your garden. They're stunning. It's great if you can site it with like an evergreen behind it so that the blooms really stand out even more so. But a fantastic native tree. And then this one I'm really excited about. So Japanese flowering apricot was one of J.C. Ralston's favorite plants. It's just a fantastic, probably one of the first flowering trees in our area, period. Some of the cultivars will actually start sometimes late December. This is one that we have planted out just above the vegetable gardens called the Omoya no Mama. I don't know what that translates to, but what excites me about this is I had built at my previous job, we had a collection over at High Point of about 20 different selections of Japanese flowering apricot. And then the nursery that I was getting these from, they have just hit a brick wall of they cannot root these things to save their lives. Well, it's one of those things of going, well, let's try. We stuck a bunch of cuttings from the one that's here at Renolda, got a bunch to root. We've got nice, 6 foot tall whips. So, it's got a little bit of height to it. So I'm excited not only to be able to offer this, but that I'm going to go start getting cuttings off all the other ones that we propagate that I had, because the color ranges on these can go from white to light pink to dark pink to red. Some of them have a fragrance almost like cinnamon. And what's great is when they grow, they'll get these long whips that are just covered with flower buds that are great if you do cut flowers, to go cut one of the stems, bring it inside, and you'll get that fragrance. But this one in particular, almost all of them are going to top out between 15 to 20 feet. This one has kind of whitish double flowers, and the calyces on the backs of the flowers are red, but really nice fragrance. Someone else had remarked they just cut one down in their yard because they had one that didn't have fragrance, which kind of surprises me, but that's the gamble you get if you don't get a cultivar sometimes. But really excited. I hope this is going to be the first in a long line of different ones we offer. There was one in my dad's yard that we stuck cuttings of that was always the first one to flower for us. Usually end of December, dark red flowers, cinnamon fragrance, just absolutely stunning. So might have a couple of those next year. But just excited about just the prospect of being able to offer these, because this flowers before anything else flowers for us in the gardens. So it's a great way to jumpstart spring. Moving on down the food chain a little bit, going into shrubs. This is again, I'm a big cheerleader for the plants that aren't necessarily in a branded, blue pot that are getting all this marketing, but are just fantastic plants. Bottlebrush Buckeye is definitely one of those. And honestly, I always describe them, they're a teenager. They look gangly in a container because it'll pretty much be 2 sticks, but it's one of those things that you've just got to have faith that get it in the ground, let it start growing. We had one of these planted at our old house, and I remember a neighbor coming across the street asking about the butterfly bush we had, because we stopped counting at 50 swallowtails on it. It'll get these long white spikes of white flowers, and the swallowtails go bonkers over it. It's a fantastic plant that just doesn't fit the profile of one of these marketing programs, because it doesn't look good in a 3-gallon pot. It gets great yellow fall color, can grow in shade to sun. It will spread slightly by rhizomes, so it will gradually increase. They can get big. I've seen some huge plants like at Longwood or Swarthmore, at Chanticleer, and I mean I would be tickled to have one that size. But just absolutely stunning in flower. So we're offering this one. So this is just Aesculus parviflora, Bottlebrush Buckeye, but we're also offering this one, which is Aesculus parviflora variety Serrata. And it's like, okay, why would I want 2? Well, what's nice about this one, looks exactly like the other one, except it blooms about 2 to 3 weeks later than the other one. So this is a thing where if you planted them both together, you can extend that season in your garden even longer. Again, great yellow fall color. will spread a little bit. They can get 8 to 12. I've seen them bigger, feet tall. You can prune them, but they just get absolutely covered. And this photo kind of illustrates, the one in bloom is just the straight species. And you can see the one on the right in that photo is just sending up the flower spike. So it's great. It's a great way to extend that season. And this is something that, you don't necessarily see offered all the time. So I was tickled to actually get it. Either that, or you've got to go through a mail order nursery. So you're going to get a tiny little plant and pay the same amount you pay for the plant in shipping. We don't charge you shipping. Another great native plant, our American beautyberry. This is just the straight species. So you get that vivid purple fruit that is edible. I always, hear that, and it's kind of like, well, how much sugar do you have to add to it to make it palatable? Because there is a difference between edible and palatable. But I have heard you can make jellies out of this. I put the challenge out there. Someone make beautyberry jelly, because I'd like to try that. It's a great native shrub. It's, it can get some serious size to it. I've seen plants that top, 8 feet tall. But it's also something that you can hack back in like late winter back to a couple inches, and it's going to branch even more so. So if it's a good, there's kind of a group of shrubs that you call cutback shrubs that you can always hack back easily and keep them basically the same size. But this, when you cut it back, you're going to get it to branch more. So then you get more flowers, which give you more fruit. But it also gets this wonderful, you can see this photo is kind of illustrating, it's starting to go into it gets great yellow fall color, which is a great complement to that bright purple fruit. And there's actually, there was a anecdotal evidence about, if you crush the leaves and rub it on your arms, it repels mosquitoes. They actually did, they went in and started testing the compounds in the leaves, and doggone it, if that, there is a basis behind it, because there's a chemical in the leaves that repels mosquitoes. So, it's a great thing. You have a plant in your garden, go out in the garden, crush a couple leaves, rub them on your arms, and just go to town in the garden. This is a plant I always try to look at. There's a number of different people that I follow that are in our region that, it's kind of like they're doing testing. Plant Delight's nursery, obviously in Raleigh, they're going to get even a little bit more heat than us. But Tony had done a post about this Bluebeard, and there's a number of different ones out there. Even on the historic plans to the formal garden, Caryopteris was on the formal plans, but at that point there were no gold foliage varieties. It does get these wonderful blue flowers. Now, of course, the one on the original plans would have had green foliage. This was, basically a little bonus. So we've got it now planted in the blue and yellow garden. It gets this beautiful yellow foliage and then those blue flowers contrasting with it. And the pollinators absolutely go nuts over it. The foliage does have a bit of a menthol scent, and that's usually a good thing to keep an eye on, because typically, and I won't say never, but typically anything that has scented foliage is less attractive to bunnies and rabbits to eat. It's not in their flavor palette. But these, Tony had posted about this variety, Cold Crest, in the last 3 years, it's been doing absolutely stunning in the garden. So we, I was going to get some for the formal garden. So if you want to go out in the blue and yellow garden, they're in there right now. But I'm really excited to be able to offer this one, because there are some yellow varieties that they're dogs. By this time of the year, you just want to dig them up and put them on the compost pile. But this one has done very well for us as well. This isn't yet another plant that I think every gardener should have. Edgeworthia, we've sold this before. It always sells out. Closely related to Daphne. What's always nice about this, it has a trichotomous growth habit, which means it always branches in threes. So it kind of forms, it naturally is rounded. You don't have to shear it. So if your landscaper comes near it with shears, just chase them off. But what's fantastic about this, I mean, even in summer, the foliage is beautiful, but as it goes into winter, the flower buds are covered in silver hairs. So even before it comes into full flower, it looks like it's flowering. It looks like it's got little silver bells hanging all over it. But then, probably going into February when the flowers start opening up, they're typically brilliant gold. and just amazing fragrance. I always say it's a Daphne that doesn't die, because they will last for an extremely long period of time. I wouldn't garden without this plant. I actually advocate for having multiple ones of these in your garden. Put one by a door, so in spring or in late winter when it's still kind of like you're ready to move on, it's a nice pick-me-up to have that fragrance coming in, especially if we get a warm day. Open the windows and let the fragrance come into the house. And the plants we've got look very good. Kudos to Hayden on growing those. We do have just straight species Oakley Hydrangea. This is a great native, more typically native a little further south from us, but these can vary because these are seedlings. They can vary. You could get one seedling that might be 3 feet tall. You might get one that's 8 feet tall. You can hack them back brutally, and that it doesn't bother them. We had some in front of an older house that when with the roof project, we hacked these things down to about a foot, and I think it just angered them because they just immediately shot back up. Great, flowers in spring, pollinators go after them. Great fall color. You can get purples, oranges, and reds all, kind of blended together on one plant. It's just a fantastic native plant to have in the garden. Continuing the theme with hydrangeas, we actually were lucky. The Arboretum in Asheville, the North Carolina Arboretum, had done a big display on hydrangeas. Well, at the end of the display, they called a number of different gardens. They're like, hey, we're done with these. Are you interested? So we went up there and filled an entire trailer full of hydrangeas. We planted some sweeps out on the property, but these are all out of the Endless Summer series. So these are reblooming hydrangeas. And people were lusting after these things in our parking lot. We kind of had to keep them away. And they already have done 2 cycles of blooming for us. So you'll get, you've got your traditional kind of bluish purple one in that Bloomstruck series. Blushing Bride is a nice white with kind of a hint of pink to it. And then Summer Crush was absolutely this stunning reddish pink in flower. And they'll do their first flush of flowers, and as they're done, just go ahead and cut them back and get them to push another flush of growth, because you'll get more flowers. That's the whole this Endless Summer started the whole craze about this. About they actually put flower buds on new wood, which is what typically we'd get a freeze. You get the plants get knocked back. That's your flowers for the year. What's nice about these, even if we get a freeze, you might get delayed flowering, but you'll still get flowers that year. But these colors, especially that Summer Crush, was absolutely stunning. So we got a number of these that we've got in the sale. And then I'm always a big advocate of, this is Mountain Hydrangea Serrata. And it's basically like your typical, old-timey hydrangeas, but they're always smaller in stature, smaller leaves, a little smaller in size, but they're hardier. And this is one that was named, it was a seedling from Woodlander's Nursery that they grew out that always has performed well, always gets this nice, really, beautiful lace cap, blue flowers. There was a massive specimen in the Lath house at the Ralston that we moved. I remember taking cuttings off of that. That went to my parents' house. Then we took cuttings off of that for here. But what's nice is even if we get a winter that knocks the flower buds off of your regular hydrangeas, your hydrangea serratas pretty much always come into flower. And I always feel like, sometimes you don't need a plant that's going to just knock you in the face with their flowers. These are a little bit more delicate, a little more, subtle, which, that's not a bad thing in the garden at times. But fantastic one. We've got some great looking 3 gallons of these. Moving on to Elysium, which I think in our last plant sale, we might have overloaded people with Elysium. We've got a couple different ones this year, but if you're looking for an evergreen that is fairly disease or deer resistant, what I've learned, and I got panicked when I saw a colleague of mine said something about, oh, great, the deer figured it out. The deer apparently are going for the Asian species of Elysium. They're not going for the native ones. So, I was like, oh, okay. That gave me a glimmer of hope. Elysium, it's kind of weird because they're all more native down to in the Florida range and on the Gulf Coast. And what it's theorized is basically when the ice sheets, were pushing everything down, it shoved everything down, you know, in Florida and the southern tier, and they didn't, some things didn't make their way back up because there's no other way to explain why is this plant that's growing in Florida hardy up in Asheville, North Carolina. So that's one of the theories about these. And they always, all the Elysiums, you crush their leaves, it smells like black licorice. So, you know, the deer are not really happy about it. This one, Florida Sunshine, came years ago. Plant Delights, Tony Avent had gone down to a nursery that was growing Elysium by seed. And he was walking their fields and he saw, you know, there were some gold ones scattered about. There were some variegated ones. And he's like, what are you doing with these? And, oh, we throw them away. And Tony's like, you mind if I take a couple back? So he brought them back. He had about, I remember this was back when I was working at Plant Delight, so early 2000, planted a couple out of the garden, evaluated them over a couple years. This one that you see in the top photo, that's the original plant growing in what we called the new garden at that time. Just great, brilliant yellow fall or foliage, gets even brighter in winter. One trick, don't plant it where it's going to get a lot of, you know, like if you're out in full open in winter, it can get burned. Give it a little bit of protection, whether it's a tree canopy above it. This one that's, you see the full plant on the bottom, that was taken at Duke Gardens right after we had, I think, 8 straight days below freezing, and that's how the plant looked. It's a fantastic, you know, evergreen, in this case, evergold foliage. Those leaf stems actually get a red color. Just a great, you know, evergreen for the garden. And then what's happened is Tom Rainey, who's a plant breeder up at NC State, and he's at the research station in the mountains, took one species of Elysium, that's the Elysium Floridanum, crossed it with Elysium mexicanum, which is just a you know, species that's a little further south that tends to reflower. He crossed those two, and the hybrids have this reflowering habit. They don't stop. And when we were visiting, when we were picking up the deciduous azaleas for the, when we redid all the azaleas in the formal garden, the nursery manager said that one plant of Scorpio, which is this red flowered one, has more flowers on it than the entire crop of Elysium flora, just the straight species. And I mean, it was absolutely dripping with flowers. The flowers they do have a little bit of fragrance, but it's definitely not something to stick your nose in. It's sometimes I've heard it described as wet dog. But great evergreen, wonderful flowers. And these two having that reflowering habit, they're just fantastic plants. And I can't wait. Tom has apparently been continuing to breed, so now he's getting foliage colors in this reflowering habit. So I'm excited to see what's going to come out of his program. So Scorpio and Orion. And then here's another great evergreen. This is Lakotha. So this is in the blueberry family. You can see those flowers. Kind of think about your blueberry bushes, those little urn-shaped flowers. That's typical in a lot of the members of this family. This is a great evergreen. It'll kind of send out runners and keep spreading. What's nice about this one is because it's variegated, it gives you a little bit more oomph to it. The new foliage, when it comes out, kind of really has those enhanced tones of those pinks start showing up. It'll settle down to more of white and green variegated, but it's a fantastic evergreen for shade. Let's see. Definitely do not put it in dry soils. They would be very unhappy. Let's see. This is actually another plant that came from Nan Janeway's garden. This is mock orange, which, you know, most of us are familiar with mock orange or Philadelphus. This is a gold foliage form. Now, it's brilliant gold when it comes out in spring. I mean, screaming yellow. Absolutely, you know, intense fragrance to it. Once it's done flowering, the gold, you know, as we start getting into the really heat of summer, the gold starts to fade and goes to more chartreusey green. But just a fantastic one, great to cut some stems, bring it in the house to bring fragrance in the house. But if you're looking for a bit of color in the garden, aside from just the flowers, this one just screams at you. Here's another native, Ninebark. This is one that you can see, like when you're up in the mountains on the Blue Ridge, you'll see these. They've come out with all these different purple foliage ones, yellow foliage ones. I'll be honest, I've gotten sick of them because there's some weird fungus or something that hits them that I've seen that shows up. I haven't seen that show up on the straight species. But what's nice about these is you get, these white flowers in spring, which transition to the fruit is almost red, almost a cobalt red, not cobalt, ruby red. And then as the plants get older, they'll get exfoliating bark to them. It can get some decent size to it, but great, native plant. Again, you can treat it like a cutback. It starts getting too big, hack it back. It won't bother it a bit. But multi-season interest. It also gets good fall color. Another one, this one, again, like the Elysium, at the end of every plant sale, it's kind of like, why did that not sell? The Viburnum Nudum, I don't know why people don't garden more with this. It has absolutely gorgeous foliage that even at the end of the season looks like it's been waxed. It's beautiful foliage. It gets white flowers in early spring. Those flowers, as they go to fruit, the fruit goes from white berries to pink berries to blue. So you can see the fruit transitioning there. It is deciduous, amazing fall color to it. And you'll see these, you go hiking in the Blue Ridge, you'll see them up there. Winter Thur is just one selection out there. One of the best things to do is to plant, it's kind of like blueberries. If you want to get a really nice fruit set to it, plant a different clone. They're happier that way. You'll get more, pollination, more fruit set on them. So, if that's what you really want to get out of it as a fruit set, is make sure you've got a different clone, which ironically we happen to have. This is Viburnum nudum, like the one we just talked about before, but this is one that has more narrow leaves. And actually, I got cuttings of this plant off of a plant that was down at Hopeland Gardens in Aiken, South Carolina. If you've ever been down to Aiken, they've turned the entire city into an arboretum. Aiken's the home of Woodlander's Nursery, which is an amazing native plant nursery, also other plants. And, they just constantly would plant things out on the boulevard. The streets are lined up as boulevards, but amazing trees when you drive out there. Do not drive with a plant person because they will be stopping intermittently all over the place looking at plants. But this was the first place that I ever saw this viburnum. And it's got a little bit more, because it's got the narrow foliage, has a little bit different texture, gets great fall color, gets the same fruit like the other one. So this is a way that you could have both pollinators, so you get good fruit set on both. And the plants that we've planted up at the boardwalk up by Coliseum have really taken off. So, and again, you can hack it back. It responds really well to pruning. But great native viburnums. And like I said, I was puzzled they did not sell as well as they did initially, but the plants look fantastic. Another one that I took this personally that it didn't sell because this is a plant that I introduced. Julia said she bought one, so she's off the list. But this is our native arrowwood. So our native viburnum that you'll see even out in the woods here. But this happened years ago when I was working at the Ralston. We were doing a statewide evaluation network. We were down in the eastern part of the county where they have the pine plantations. Driving along, something caught my eye. We turned around. I had to jump a drainage ditch. There was a gold sport coming out on a plant on one of these, little canal ditches. We yanked it out, brought it back to the Ralston, potted it up, grew it out a little bit. Brilliant gold foliage on our native viburnum. So it again, adds a great aspect of foliage. It'll transition from brilliant gold to kind of a chartreusey gold and more shade. They will, if you have multiple plants, so different clones, you can get blue fruit on it. So that's a nice little contrast that you can get on the plant. But I'll take this personally if y'all don't buy this, because this was one of my plants. But it's a great native plant. Okay, moving into perennials. We've got a pretty large selection of perennials in this one. A different ornamental onion. If you've ever grown these, the foliage smells like onion foliage, which again, little critters are not happy about that, so they pretty much leave it alone. It's coming into flower about this time in the garden. This one, Medusa, the foliage is kind of a bluish green. kind of like a little bit twisted. So it's got a nice texture to the foliage, but when it comes into flower, you get these amethyst purple. They're golf ball sized flowers, and the clump will just build up year after year. So this is something that, you know, as it gets some size, you can dig it up and divide it out. But some great, you know, fall flower color in the garden, and very critter resistant. We've got a couple different hummingbird mints, the agastaches. These are great for flowering the whole season. You know, and there's so many different ones out there. This Poquito, butter yellow, and dark blue. Those are ones that were selected for more of a dwarf habit to them. Pink pearl. It's kind of got a nice bicolor look to it. The trick to growing these is make sure they do not have wet feet in winter. If they are wet in winter, they're dead. They've really got to have well-drained soils. But, you know, even growing them as an annual, they flower the whole, you know, from the beginning of summer until frost nails them. It's good, you know, sometimes you can just shear them back and they'll reflush and just keep going. We do have some butterfly weed. This, of course, is, you know, Asclepias is critical for monarch butterflies because it's not as much about the butterflies, but it's the caterpillars munching on the foliage. They get that, most of Asclepias, when you break the leaves, there's a milky sap to it. Well, in that sap is a toxin that the butterflies ingest and makes them not palatable to predators. But most of these are going to be your typical orange. The only trick when you plant these, make sure that's where you're keeping them. They do not transplant well. So, you know, I'm trying to make a point that we always have Asclepias available in our plant sales. This is another group of plants that I love that I'm kind of like, you know, you always see the football mums, you know, which are the big round ones that you see in the garden center showing up right about now, which are fine. Nothing wrong with them. I love the garden mums, or sometimes they're called Korean mums, which they're hardy. They come back year after year. They spread. This one that you see on the left, Golden Snowflakes, actually, as Tony puts it, there was a little hanky-panky in the garden at Plant Delights. Gethsemane Moonlight pollinated with a Jania, which it's chrysanthemum relative, great foliage, but you know, we got this intermediate form between it. The petals are a little bit spoon-shaped or quilled. Raspberry sorbet gets, you know, these really nice kind of purplish pink flowers. Both of these went in when we redid the pink and yellow and blue and white. Both of these are in the garden now. But they're fantastic perennials, and especially coming in late, you know, that late push of color. You don't have to prune them back, you know, or shear them, but if you are wanting to keep them in balance, stop doing that after the 4th of July should be your, you know, your landmark date. Stop pruning your chrysanthemums, because after that, then you're cutting flower buds off. But I just got out, there's a nursery called King's Mums that 2 years ago, because of the whole demand with COVID of everyone starting to garden, they were so overwhelmed that then they restricted for 2 years. They only sold to previous customers. Luckily this year I got in and I ordered 50 different types of hardy mums. So we're going to grow them out. Some we might go, yeah, that's not good, but we're going to sort them out and be able to offer a number of different ones each year. Gracosmia, we've grown a number of different ones in the garden. We've offered Walburton Yellow, which is a really tall one. And typically when the flowers come out, they kind of arch out and spread out. This one has struck me that it's very small. It's only about 2 feet tall, very upright. And even the flower stems, instead of kind of arching out, they go almost straight up. So this is one out of Terra Nova's breeding program out in the West Coast. We've incorporated a bunch of these into the blue and yellow garden, but you know, these will gradually increase in your garden. You can spread them around. Also make great cut flowers. This is one that we've had in the blue and yellow for a couple years. I've always been enamored with this plant. It's hard to get flowers that are sky blue. Blue is just not an easy color horticulturally. This one, it kind of behaves like a daylily in that each flower only lasts about a day, but it keeps sending out different flowers. And this is a great plant to tuck in amongst other things because it's got kind of, foliage like you'd see on a gladiolus of those, kind of sword-shaped leaves kind of poking up through. So you can tuck it in amongst other things, and then it'll send up this flower spike about 2 to 3 feet tall, and it'll keep putting these sky blue flowers out each day. And we've grown a whole bunch out from seed, put a whole bunch into the blue and yellow garden because I love the way they just kind of pop up in amongst everything else. So I'm really excited to actually be able to offer this, because pretty much it's either Plant Delights where you're paying $18 for a quart plant, or maybe a mail order nursery where you're paying the same amount for the plant as you pay for shipping. So really happy to be able to offer this one. Coneflowers, of course, there's tons and tons of them. I am definitely trying to focus on ones that I know have been around for a while. With coneflowers, I'm not necessarily after the first ones that have just come out. I want ones that have a track record. This one, Fragrant Angel, was growing at Plant Delights when I was gardening there. And when you hear the name fragrant, you don't necessarily think about coneflowers with fragrance. This one smells like milk chocolate, and strongly of milk chocolate. So working in the garden when you're hungry can get a little dangerous. And Plant Delights they've said this has been the best white flowering coneflower that they've grown. And this is years of it being in the garden. So it's a really good cultivar that stays white, has that amazing fragrance. Pollinators go just bonkers over it. And that's kind of where maybe the newest thing isn't the best thing. I want one that, since there's about 100 different coneflowers out there, I'm more interested in the ones that have persisted and still been around. This is a real, if you are looking to get pollinators in the garden, Eryngium is one of the best plants. It will be absolutely covered in tons. I mean, if you want kids to learn about insects, they get absolutely covered in, different wasps, moths, everything you can imagine. I mean, it's amazing to see a patch of these in flower. And they're so unique in flower. It sends up this spike and little, like Sputnik, granted, I don't think we can explain that to kids these days. They'd probably look at us with a blank stare. Ball-shaped flowers that pollinators just go nuts over. The foliage, definitely, it's kind of before it flowers, it's kind of nondescript. It's kind of got a little bit of a powder blue cast to it, but then about midsummer it starts sending up this spike. And like I said, if you're trying to bring pollinators into the garden, you've got to have this in the garden. We've got another one that's I'm hoping will start gathering seed, that the flowers are sky blue. It's flowering. If you go in the garden where the Lion's Head fountain is, it's in flower right up at the top of the Lion's Head fountain. Heliopsis, if you're looking for something that's going to have a really long flowering time, we don't have this particular one at our house, but good Lord, it's flowered for a month plus. This is one called Burning Hearts, also called Oxeye, because it's got that bright yellow flower with more of an orange center to it. Now they are saying, so don't come after me, but they are saying deer and rabbit resistant. I will say at our, where we've got it planted in the yard, the deer and rabbits are constantly mowing a lot of things down, and they have not touched Heliopsis. So maybe there is something to it, but this is a fantastic plant for a long season of flowers. These were 2 hostas that I got really excited about, and apparently in the spring no one else did. But now that they've grown on a little bit more and they have filled out the pots more, this one just absolutely, they're both this one and the next hosta, they're smaller statured hostas, but this one has this beautiful blue foliage, and it's just covered in flowers when it comes into flower. So for me, when a hosta grabs my attention, that's not normal. Normally I glaze over with hostas because it's the old thing of, I've got both. I've got the green and the variegated one. But this one really stood out to me, and it comes from Hans Hansen, who's the breeder up at Walters, and he's an amazing breeder. And anything that really comes out of his breeding program, I'm convinced it's a good plant. So this is one called Silly String, really nice, like I said, blue foliage, smaller size hosta. And then this other one called Time in a Bottle, brilliant gold foliage. But what really grabbed my attention and got me really excited, only to be disappointed, the flower buds don't open. So instead of like most hostas where they open up, these, they stay closed. And the reason I got excited, there's a species of hosta called Hosta Closa where the flower buds don't open. And I got really excited thinking, oh my God, they finally have been able to crack the code and be able to cross, because how do you cross a flower when it doesn't open? But Han said, no, it just happens to be a weird thing that this one doesn't open. But one of the things that's nice is the fact that it doesn't open, the flowers last even longer. So you get this really intense, these purple flowers that last way longer than typical hostas. So you get that nice contrast of this brilliant yellow foliage and those bright purple flowers. And granted, they were very small this spring, so I'm going to chalk it up to that. But we've got both of these hostas available this fall, and they both look fantastic. Liatris, which is a favorite of mine, the whole genus, I want them all. This is one that dwarf blazing star, only gets about 2 feet tall. Sends up multiple spikes of flowers. The pollinators, butterflies, everything goes bonkers over it. We've got this intermixed with one of the ornamental grasses up by the boardwalk. So it's a nice blending of textures up there. Just a fantastic, tough plant. And it's flowering right now is its normal bloom time. This one, people probably are going, why in God's name is he promoting Liriope? But there are some really cool Liriopes out there. And this one came from Ursula Hertz, which is a plants woman down in South Carolina, that brilliant gold foliage. If you put it into shade, it's a more chartreusey yellow. If you bring it out into full sun, it's bright gold, gets the typical, those purple flowers that contrast great with the foliage. And it's a Liriope. It's tough as nails, except for when you have the rabbits that are here at Ronaldo that immediately mow it down. That's been a little bit of a frustration, but this is a fantastic, if you're looking to bring color into the garden, whether it be in shade or sun, it's tough as nails. It's a great plant. And it's not there is the bad Liriope, the one that runs like the Dickens and it takes you decades to get rid of. This is the clumping one. It's well behaved. But it's a fantastic, absolutely fantastic, tough as nails perennial. And of course, blooming right now in Ronaldo is the spider lilies. We do have these again for sale. These, people just go bonkers over them. They've got a number of different names. Spider flower, naked ladies is another name because they flower without foliage. So they send up the flower spikes now. After the flowers are done, then they send up the foliage. They also call them hurricane lilies down in the Gulf because they always bloom during hurricane season. One thing that if you get any of these, make sure you don't plant them deep. You want the neck of the bulb to be just right at the soil level. There's an old wives' tale that, if you move these, it takes 7 years for them to flower. That's not the case. What people were doing was when they plant them too deep, the bulb starts forming new bulbs on top of it to bring it back up to the height it wants to be. And it typically takes that long for it to make new bulbs for them to get big enough to flower. So just plant these shallow. And they multiply very well in the garden. And this one, this has been around since maybe late 1800s in the US, but they're tough as nails. And it's nice because the flowers come up in fall and you have that, and then the foliage, and that foliage persists throughout winter. So I usually like, when I've got perennials that go dormant, start tucking these bulbs all around. So you get this last of the season hurrah of the flowers, and then you have foliage. So it's not bare during winter. Tiarellas, this is another plant, kind of like echinaceas, where it's kind of like you get glossy eyed over there's so many of them out there. This is one that Plant Delights, again, tested in Raleigh. So I feel comfortable about, it's not like it was tested in Oregon. But this is one that they regard as the best pink flowered Tiarella that's out on the market. And the fact that it's still popular even after it's off patent, so 20 years later, it's got staying power. So this one gets these really nice pink flowers in spring, grows to, it's a clumper, so it only gets about a foot wide, but great spring flowering perennial for the shade. And of course, you can't talk about fall without asters. And we've got this one, again, comes from the breeding program at Walters, which, top-notch breeding up there. This one called Grape Crush, which has these, nice blue-purple flowers. What's nice is this one they tout is not one that kind of just falls apart. You have this beautiful, nice looking, rounded plant that just suddenly splits. And this will get about, 2.5 to almost, 3.5 feet wide. So just great fall color. And lastly, and this one I never figure out whether I to put it in shrubs or perennials because it kind of straddles both. It's a suckering woody perennial. If that doesn't check all the boxes, but this we even have it growing down along the trails in the woodland garden. It'll spread, slowly by suckers. It's called yellow root because it's in the same family as barberry. It's in the same family as epimedium. But if you scratch the stems, it's bright yellow. And, that was used to actually make dyes. It gets gorgeous yellow fall color. The flowers aren't really that much to, write home about. It's these weird kind of purple flowers in early spring that you almost have to strain to see. But, for a shady kind of moist area in the garden, this is a great spreading ground cover to go in the garden. Ferns, which, one of the nice things about ferns is they generally are deer resistant. I don't know why, but deer tend to leave ferns alone. And this is one of my favorite ferns out there, bar none, Ethereum Ghost. And this was, it's great when you have a garden that has a lot of different things in it, because when you start getting hanky-panky in the garden, you get these really cool hybrids starting to show up. This is, if you've grown Japanese painted fern, that crossed with hay fern, and we got this amazing hybrid with these. I mean, the foliage on this is silver. It's beautifully silver, but it's more, whereas Japanese painted fern is more arching and mounding, this one goes up. It almost doesn't look real because it's so rigid looking, but absolutely fantastic selection. The photo down on the bottom was kind of I'd like to say I planned this combination, but this was in the garden at High Point that I planted that we had, oh man, I'm forgetting what type of lily we had in there. Mardigan lilies that just popped out through these. And I love this combination. And that's the only flower you're seeing in that photo. So it's one of those things of start with foliage. Flowers are just extra. And this one absolutely stunning in the garden. This is one that's just recently come out that I want to get this in my own yard to really, I'm kind of like, okay, I've seen the marketing photos. Let's see if this isn't, hopefully it has not been Photoshopped, but it's a Dryopteris, which are wood ferns, and the new growth is supposed to be this brilliant gold new growth on it. So think about autumn ferns where they get that nice kind of rusty colored, I don't know how you describe it, but autumn ferns when they leaf out, kind of similar. Of the new growth is just this amazing color. And then just kind of settles down as the season goes to typical green. But this one called Jurassic Gold, which I'm hoping is going to live up to the hype. This Holisticum tassel fern, all your Holisticums, so like Christmas fern, they're clump forming ferns, so they're not going to run. It just forms a solid clump that does get bigger with age, but just almost plastic looking like foliage. It's so sturdy looking. But again, this is an evergreen fern, so this will give you that texture all throughout the season. I wouldn't, if you're going to cut it back, if it starts looking, sad, wait till, spring when it starts getting ready to put out new foliage. Because one of the things they've learned is sometimes that old foliage is actually keeping the crown a little bit warmer. Okay, and kind of starting to wrap things up, a couple vines. If you've ever grown our native honeysuckle, they're typically coral. This is a selection that was made that tends to lean more into an orange color to it. So it's our typical, our native honeysuckle. Hummingbirds, whether it's orange, red, or whatever, there's a yellow form. Hummingbirds absolutely adore this plant. And it'll flower pretty much throughout most of the season, and it can tolerate sun too. You can even start moving it into shade. It's going to flower less, but it'll still flower a little bit. And then this is a wisteria that, before you throw anything, this is a native wisteria. When we redid the blue and yellow garden, you know, we had the wisteria, the tree form wisteria is in there, and I just was like, I don't in good conscience want to bring back Chinese wisteria into that garden. So there's, you know, the Wisteria frutescens that you see, you know, that it reflowers, but it does, for me, it doesn't give you that oomph. It doesn't have the long chains like, you know, the Chinese wisteria, because they're normally short, little clustered. Well, this is Kentucky wisteria, so it's a species that's more around, you know, kind of Kentucky, West Virginia, that whole area, but it gets long chains of flowers. It's a native wisteria. It's not as vigorous as the Chinese, which, you know, we all know can take down trees. But it gets long chains, and once it gets happy and established, it can bloom up to 3 times a year. So, you know, we were excited to add this into the garden, and then obviously when we're able to get plants to be able to offer this. So it's a nice native wisteria. Now, you know, to say that wisteria isn't as vigorous as the Chinese wisteria, now bear in mind that Chinese wisteria is super aggressive. So it's a vine, it will send out runners. So if you're trying to keep it on a trellis, you do have to prune it a little bit, but this is just a fantastic selection. So that wraps up kind of touching upon things. We've got, you know, well over 100 different types of plants. So, you know, obviously can't talk about them all because I don't think I even have the stamina. I like talking plants, but we'd be here for hours. But we're really excited about the fall plant sale. We've got, I think, a really good selection of plants, a lot of natives. You know, a few details. Again, about 2 o'clock is when the email is scheduled to send out. If you don't immediately see it, check your spam. You know, do all the checking, and then, you know, if you still don't see it, reach out to us, and we'll make sure that, you know, could have been that your membership lapsed 2 weeks ago, and, you know, when it generates the list, it kicked you out. But we can easily get that remedy. But the pre-ordering will go up until the Wednesday before the plant sale at 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, I pretty much shut it down because at that point I'm absolutely exhausted. And this year it's a little different because we did move the plant sale a week later, partially because we had, you know, family weekend, I think, is going on at the university. There were too many demands pulling us, and it was like, let's just move it a week later. So you actually get even longer. So you know, good to know, because you can continue ordering. You can place multiple orders. We do ask, like I said, you know, once everything comes in, we will send an email confirming your order, letting you know, hey, sorry, we did sell out of this. We'll let you know that, but you'll get a link. You can pay online. It's easy. You can come Friday, pick your plants up, you know, between 10 to 6. You can continue to shop, no problem, up until 6 o'clock. Let's see, anything else? Again, you can continue to shop on Friday, and unfortunately, taxes have now hit us too. But if you don't get that email and you realize you lapsed, you can either, you know, immediately call one of us and we can help get that settled. But you can go online, you know, let us know, hey, I just submitted my membership. We'll get you all, you know, we know gardeners are pretty much good people. Otherwise we'll come after you. But you know, again, this is a big, you know, big part of our budget is earned revenue. And so the plant sale, it's a big part of it, but it's a fun part of it because it's sharing plants, and it's hopefully sharing some cool plants that you're not going to find anywhere else. So with that being said, you know, you've got, let's see, what time is it right now? You've got 20 minutes to get home and be waiting for that email to pop up. But, you know, we're looking forward to, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us either at gardens@renolda.org, or if you want to reach out to me, John, JON@renolda.org. I'm happy to answer any questions. And the plant sale list is online, so you can look at everything in its entirety. We've got the links, so you can click on links to look them up. But, you know, this is always an exciting part of the year, partially because I know Hayden wants to get these plants out of here. Because we need to bring in more ones. It's an endless cycle, but we're always excited about this, and we hope you are too. So with that being said, you know, again, if you run into any questions, feel free to reach out. But thank you. Do we have anything online? No questions online. Okay. So I think we're all set. And thank you all for coming. And again, next week we'll have Ann Spafford talking about rain garden design, which I'm thankful that we've actually had some rain. So, otherwise people will be like, what is that? That's how we felt definitely in the garden over these last few weeks. So we're thankful for any rain, but she's got, a great book, great presenter. So we're looking forward to that. So hopefully we'll see you here next week. Thank y'all.
I have two amazing Bluebeards. And I make jam last year. I'm gonna make some more this year. Open the jar.
I'd love to try that.
It to me, and I need to play with it more, but I almost think that I diluted berries when I was